that
almost.
artwork, Ed. You're like a professional artist here.
I know, right? This is most things I believe you can teach and learn and transfer, but there's some things where you're gifted, and you just have to. People will have to realize that there's some parts that you just can't. You just
Yeah,
can't. It's just,
it's
and my art is one of them. Is where
it's
people
it's
that
truly a gift from God. It
well,
truly.
I know it is, right? That's what can.
I'm sure you get that all the time. I'm sure it's the
Oh, of
first.
course I do. Yeah, of course. People are flawed. Usually stunned into silence is I must say the major reaction is, and I can understand that. It's very good. All right. Well, look, let's get started here, mate. So we can. Thank you very much for spending the time here with us. I'll just go silent for a second, and then I will do my professional introduction, and we'll get cracking into it. All right.
I'm ready to rock.
Very good. Okay, everybody, welcome. Thrilled to have you all here. And today we have the pleasure of interviewing Ryan Levesque. And Ryan, apart from being an extremely handsome man, I mean, look at that. Extremely handsome man. But that's not why we're here today. It is because of a number of things. One is I want to get his origin story. Part of what I think is fascinating in terms of people who've become successful in an online business is how they started. How did they literally earn their first dollar online? And we're going to talk about that. And I want to also talk to Ryan about his ask methodology. So his methodology of, funnily enough, asking people questions in order to get them to self-categorize themselves, and how that can work. And he'll explain it way better than I can. And I suppose the final thing I wanted to talk to you about today, Ryan, is sort of the third part, is if you were starting from scratch today, right? If you're completely scratched, no list, no anything, just a little bit of money, and you've got time, you're working a 9 to 5, how you would go about starting again. That would be they're sort of the three topics. If we can do those, that would be great. But welcome. And so Ryan, just to give people a little bit of background, who the three people who haven't heard of you on this recording, can you give us a little bit of background about how you got started and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. And first of all, I just want to say thanks so much for having me here. It's an honor to be able to be here and to be able to speak with you. And you've been a teacher, an educator, a mentor, someone that I've studied really since I first came into this world. So it's really cool just to be able to have this conversation like this. So how I got started, like most people, I was in a corporate job. So I graduated from college, and I was someone who I got a job, and I was working in the insurance industry. And I was working in the insurance industry. I lived in New York City. I'm in the States. I moved to Philadelphia, and then I had an opportunity that sent me to China, to Shanghai, China, to open up sales offices for this insurance company. And my wife and I, my fiance at the time, we decided to get married, had a quick wedding, and we moved to China together. And it was in China that I was basically traveling from city to city to city, and I was opening up these little sales offices for this insurance company. And I was a couple years into this, Ed, and basically I reached a point where I was burnt out. I was in my, mid-20s at this point, and I was living out of hotels. I was living out of a suitcase. I was on a plane every other week, and I said, there's got to be a different way. And I'd quietly had some friends of mine who were making money on the internet. I didn't know exactly what they were doing, but there are a few friends of mine that were kind of making money on the internet. I didn't know exactly how it worked. And so I was kind of looking at starting a business. And I said, I want to start some business. I just didn't know what to start. And my wife and I decided that we're going to do a trip to Kota Kinabalu, Malaysia. And on the way to leave our apartment and go downstairs, to the taxi that was waiting for us outside, I said, "Oh crap, I want to get an audiobook so I have something to listen to while we're, on the beach by the pool." And so I went to audible.com and I was really rushed. I had no idea what to get. And there was a book that popped up, new. And I read the title and I said, that sounds interesting. This is in 2006 or maybe 2007. And the book was The 4-Hour Workweek. And I downloaded the book and I started listening to it. And Ed, this whole new world opened up to me. And I was introduced through that to Perry Marshall and one of my most important mentors, Glenn Livingston and Alex Mendosian and Ed Dale and all of these people who were making a living online. And I said, there's this whole other world that's been unlocked.
Yeah. Now, can I just ask one question? And so remember, we're in Malaysia listening to audiobooks in the 4 hour, because this fascinates me, because your command of Mandarin, I saw you speak in different of Mandarin. Now, that's people, right. In English, you can pick a different accent, right? But for somebody who's speaking a foreign language, being able to speak in different accents in that language, and in particular Chinese, which is such a tonal beast of a language. Did you as one of your parents of Mandarin descent, where did you learn Chinese?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in college, I studied neuroscience and East Asian studies and studied Chinese studies. And the reason I studied Chinese originally is because, much to my parents' disappointment, I thought I was going to become a doctor. And I was really fascinated in traditional Chinese medicine. Yeah. And in order to study traditional Chinese medicine, like acupuncture and herbology and everything that's involved in Eastern medicine, you need to learn Chinese. Yeah. And it was on a trip. I did a couple trips to China while I was in college. I spent a summer in China. And in that process, I just fell in love with the culture and just how much of the wild, wild west it was, and just how much untapped opportunity existed. And so I studied there. I lived in China for a couple years, going back and forth. And then when we moved there permanently, I'd studied at university and I'd spent, collectively a couple years. So my Chinese was pretty good. It wasn't
from birth. You literally learned it.
It was as an adult.
As an adult, and as that is fascinating to me, because as somebody who tries to learn Japanese, and to see your competence of it was just extraordinary. And of course, saying Chinese is of course a horrible anglicizing of Mandarin and what you were doing, which was absolutely amazing. So that was, can I ask, and this may seem out of left field, but I think it actually goes to something. Did you use any particular technique to learn the language? How did you go about when you said, right, I've got to learn Chinese? How did you go about learning Chinese like that?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? And I think there's a real interesting parallel between learning a foreign language and being successful as a marketer.
This is what I want to tease out. You've hit that.
Yeah, so I think the way that I'll put it in perspective like this. So I studied one of the top colleges in America, one of the 8 Ivy League schools, which is like the Oxford, Cambridge of America, and so like the best education that you can get. And I spent 4 years studying Chinese, and I did it in a very academic way with flashcards and books and tests and everything like that. And then one summer, I spent 8 weeks in an intensive program in Beijing, where basically you are required to sign a language pledge, which states that you are going to speak nothing but Chinese, read nothing but Chinese. You're even going to listen to nothing but Chinese music for the next 8 weeks. And if they catch you doing any interaction in any language other than Chinese, that you are kicked out of the program with no refunds. And so it attracts a super serious type of person who wants that level of immersion. Yeah. And I'll tell you, Ed, and I tell this story in my book, but I'll tell you, Ed, when I had studied for 2 years at university at this point, I go to this program and I am the worst kid in my class. Like I am by far the worst kid. They barely let me into my level. And they almost dropped me down to like the remedial level. And so I was like barely squeaked in. And
Yeah.
I made it a point to work as hard as I could that summer. And then when I came back to university, my teacher, who was the same teacher I had before I left, at the beginning of class, first day of class, she asked everyone, how was in Chinese, how was your summer? What did you do? Everyone's kind of fumbling over the words because most people took the summer off, right?
Yep.
And I opened my mouth, and I can remember it to this day. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember what she was wearing. I remember what class that we were in. Ed, her jaw hit the floor. And the marketing lesson in all this is this. So I spent 8 weeks in immersion, and I learned more Chinese in that 8-week immersive experience than I did in 4 years of university Chinese.
Yeah.
And the thing that I've always taken this with me is that whenever I enter a new market, whenever I launch a new product, I make it a point to immerse myself in the language, the natural language that market is using to describe their challenges, to describe their problems, to express what it is that they want. And I'll tell you, there's no better education than actually sitting down face to face with someone in a foreign language and fumbling through that conversation, asking it, can you repeat that again? Can you say that again? What does that mean exactly? And as a marketer, I think it's really instructive because I think the thing that's really comfortable for most people is to, do the flashcard method, right? To read about marketing in a book, as opposed to going out there and actually asking your audience the questions you need to ask in order to understand what it is that they want. So you as an entrepreneur can echo that language back to them to better sell and better serve.
Yeah, it's so good. I think one is actually a student at a meetup recently, Cara Berglund. She said something which I just thought was amazing. I said, I'm going to rip this off enormously from you because I thought it was just a great thing. I think a lot of people starting out with market, she's in the cat market as it happened, and she said, I know cats, I don't know cat people. And I think that has the parallel. And one of the great things about learning a language is and now it's interesting that you had neuroscience. I didn't miss that little tidbit there, Ryan. the other part of, because you would know, and I'm by no means formally trained, but just fascinated as a hobbyist, that neurolinguistics, and forget even the NLP, Richard Bandler, Tony Robbins stuff from it, although I think that they're highly, highly relevant and a part of this. But the reality is our language is so powerful in how it frames how we think and what we do, and you all of a sudden, and just the most basic things like understanding in Japanese that all syllables are the same size. So all of a sudden, when they're speaking in English and they have that, that cadence of speaking, it's not because it's because they've learned Japanese. That cadence is ingrained in their language. And that's just the first level, let alone how you think in a different language and how that makes such a difference. And that, to me, it seems as though you brought a lot of that learning into your marketing as well.
Absolutely. The nuance of language and the psychology and neuroscience of how we process language, it's such a central theme in everything that has been successful for me as a marketer. And like, I'll draw another example. So you introduced the Japanese example, and the nuance of language is so important when it comes to resonating with your market. And I'll give you an example in Chinese. So in Chinese, it's a tonal language, which means that the word M-A, and I'll pronounce it in a few different ways for you. The word M-A that we would in English just say ma, means vastly different things depending on how the tone that you attach to that syllable. So for example, ma means horse. Ma means mother. And ma is a bad word. It's kind of like a swear word, right? That you would introduce to something. So you can see if you string those together in the right order, right? Yep. You might accidentally call someone's mother a horse in a very inappropriate way. So we don't have some of those nuances in
Yeah.
English. And I think, the lesson there is that sometimes the difference between resonating with your audience and them saying, oh my gosh, how do I buy what it is that you're selling? And then turning them off completely can be the difference between a simple phrase. Sometimes it can be the difference between a simple word. And an example I give that I may have shared when you and I saw each other at the event that we're both part
This
of.
is great. Yes.
Was the nuance of a single letter. So a big part of my life is Lego, the toy Lego. I've got two young boys, and we love playing Lego. We play Lego all the time. It's some of my most.
I can tell you're into languages because you are actually pronouncing it correctly, as opposed to most Americans who pronounce Lego.
And that's the punchline to this.
Sorry, I stepped on your punchline.
No. It's great. No, it's great because I'll people know this about me. People who have been following my work, they'll know this, and they'll come up to me and they say, "Oh, Ryan, me and my family, we're so into Legos as well," and it breaks my heart because I'm what's known as an AFOL, which is an adult fan of Lego. And as an adult fan of Lego, if you pronounce Legos as in the plural, and it's not as big of an issue in Australia as it is in the United States, it's a tell. Because Lego is like the word deer, like the animal deer. It's both the singular and the plural. And so if someone comes up to me and all they need to do is say, "Oh, I'm so into Legos," immediately I know that they are not a true AFOL, an adult fan of Lego. I know that with that simple little tell. And so the thing to think about is in your marketing, what language might you be using that maybe is a misplaced word? Maybe it's just a misplaced syllable, or in the case of Legos, a misplaced letter that is immediately discrediting you with your audience. Now, the antidote, the secret, is to echo back the natural consumer language that your true fans, your most hyper-responsive segment of your market is using, and use that language instead of your own personal language. So you don't need to worry if you're not a cat, if you don't understand cat people and you only understand cats. You want to echo back the language that the cat people, or whatever that equivalent of that is in your market, is naturally using in your space.
Absolutely. So we're going to circle back because one of the ways that you can discover the language of a market, I think you may have something to do with really exploring that. So we'll hold that thought. Now we'll transport back to your audio book. You've just listened to the 4-hour. You've just listened to the 4-hour work week, and you're going, "Oh my goodness, there's this other world here." But you didn't read about it. You didn't study. You didn't book study this. What did you do?
Yeah. So like many entrepreneurs, I knew I wanted to start a business, Ed, but I just had no idea. And I was all over the map, right? We were in Asia, and I was thinking, how can I use this opportunity? Like maybe I could open up a McDonald's franchise in Asia. Like McDonald's is just taking off in China. Maybe we'll start an import-export company and take advantage of our position there. And I had all these crazy ideas. My wife and I thought about opening up a bakery in Shanghai. And we even went as far as actually baking cupcakes and selling them to like our friends before we decided we didn't want to get into that business. But I knew I wanted to start a business. I just didn't know what. And my wife one day comes to me and she says, "Hey, there's this new website." Again, you got to remember, this is like 2007 at this point. There's this new website, and it's like eBay for handmade goods, and it's called Etsy.com. And I said, "Okay, that's really cool." And she says, "There's this really cool jewelry that is like blowing up. It's selling like crazy on the site." And so Etsy, for anyone who's not familiar, it's like where crafters sell their handmade goods. So you'll have people who make jewelry, people who make like knitted garments. You'll have people who will make little paintings and art and things like that. And so it's all anything's for it's all things like that. And so there's this jewelry that's really hot that involves Scrabble tiles. And basically what women were doing is they take Scrabble tiles, like from the game Scrabble, and they would put they put origami paper on the tile and they put a resin on top of it, and it made it into like this beautiful looking bead where the resin kind of had a magnifying effect on the origami paper. And my wife says, this is amazing. Here we are in Asia. We have the best selection of origami paper. We can compete with everybody in the United States. We have this low-cost labor pool that we could set up a mini factory creating this jewelry. We're going to be rich. We're going to sell it, better future. And I thought to myself, okay, that's interesting. And then very quickly was like, I don't want that business. I don't want to have to deal with a factory and importing stuff into different countries and all this stuff. And so we killed that idea. We squashed it. And then maybe a couple of weeks later, she says, okay, Ryan, you remember that Scrabble tile thing? I was like, yeah, I thought we talked about that. And she's like, no. I want to show you this other seller. And the cool thing about Etsy at the time, I don't know if this is true now, but at the time it worked like eBay, where you could go to a seller's listing and you could go to that seller and you could see exactly how many sales they were making every single day. You could see exactly how much the value was of each sale, and you could basically reverse engineer how much money they're making. You could see exactly how much money they're making on a daily basis. And so there was this woman who, this is like a funny tangent to the story, whose name was incidentally Ryan. So she was a woman with the name Ryan, who was teaching people how to make this jewelry. And she was selling this ebook tutorial on how to make it for about $25. And she was selling on average 20 of these things a day. And we quickly did the math. And we said, oh my gosh, this woman is making $500 a day in basically profit. That's like $15,000 a month in profit, just teaching people how to make this stuff. We bought her product. It was like 3 pages. It looked like it was thrown together in a Microsoft Word document in 5 minutes. We said, you know what? We can build a better mousetrap. And so that's exactly what we did. We built a better mousetrap. We sold an ebook. And when we first started selling, it didn't take off. And I said, well, this doesn't make any sense. We have the best product in the market. What's wrong? And the birth of what's now known as the Ask Method happened when, out of desperation, we reached out to the tiny little email list that we had that was like, I don't know, a couple hundred people. And we just asked them, why haven't you bought? We have the best price. We have the best product. Why haven't you bought? And the answers that came back, Ed, were as follows. People would say, this is cool, but what we really want to know is how to make the Scrabble jewelry with photographs instead of origami paper. Like they wanted to make like locket style, photo jewelry with like pictures of their kids or their mom or something like that. So they wanted that. Another group of people said, we don't want to make it with Scrabble tiles. That's kind of cheap. We want to do it with glass mosaic tiles to make it like a higher end type jewelry. How do you do that? And then there was this other group of women that said, we've already bought all the Scrabble. I have like 10 Scrabble games at home. I've got like shelves of origami paper. I've got all the materials. What else can I make with all this crap? And so we realized, Ed, that we didn't have one market we were trying to serve. There were actually 4 different markets. The people who wanted to make that Scrabble tile jewelry, but then these 3 other markets. So we went back to the drawing board and we created a bundle of 4 different tutorials that we sold together instead of just that one, to serve each of the different buckets in that market. And we did that, and the business took off from nothing to almost $10,000 a month, just selling ebooks in this tiny little obscure market. And that's how everything started.
And did you sell that on Etsy? Was that were you selling the guide on Etsy?
We sold it. We sold it on Etsy. Then we built a website on Blogger. We created a website. We started selling it on our website. I learned Google AdWords. We started selling, driving traffic to the website through Google AdWords. We started going on these other third-party sites like Dawanda and youcanmakethis.com, which are kind of like the ClickBank of this space. And so we started selling our tutorials on their space. Then we got requests for physical tutorials. And so people wanted like an actual printed, a full color thing. So we started selling those on eBay, because on eBay, you actually, at the time, at least, I don't know if this is true now, you had to have some physical component. You couldn't just sell like a digital product. So
that's right. In the old days, you're absolutely correct.
We give them an actual physical copy of the tutorial as well as like the digital one in PDF. And so through all those channels combined, we took it from nothing to almost $10,000 a month. At this point, I'd quit my job. My wife was in a PhD program. She was ending that. And we're like, we're going to go all in. Like, this is crazy. This is great. And then just as soon as we kind of started taking off, it wasn't a few months later that the worldwide Scrabble tile jewelry market crashed.
Collapsed.
Like the fad was over. Like people were done. They had moved on to the next shiny object. And that business went from like almost $10,000 a month to almost nothing. And then we had that moment where I think many entrepreneurs go through this, where my wife and I looked at each other. And at this point, we'd kind of run through some of our savings. I didn't have a job. She was a grad student, so she wasn't making any money. We looked at each other and we said, oh crap, now what do we do? And basically
in some ways, that's a big challenge, right? There's where people have an initial success, right? And you did so many things that.
And I lost your audio. I just lost your audio. Gary, did we do anything on our end?
Oh, no, that's...
I got you back now. I lost you for a second, but I hear you now.
Yeah, there you go. Zoom just went a little bit funny there. Let me just start that part again. So
sure.
What was... So you reached this crossroad point where you had a market that worked. It did well for a while, but then it stopped working.
Right.
So what did you do? Because that's a day. I know many people who have, tried. It's a bit like a gambler who, puts money in a slot machine and they actually win. And then they spend the rest of their life chasing that win. So how did you, this is really going to be instructive, and then we'll move on to the ask method. How did you go about getting from, oh my goodness, this is all stopped, we've got all these bills, to the next effort?
Yeah. So at this point, my wife and I had that moment. We looked at each other and she said, well, here's what I'll do. I don't want you to give up on this dream, and I'll finish my PhD program and I'll get a job. We'll move back to the States. We'll move back to the United States and I'll get a job. And her PhD, her academic background is in art and history. So fields that don't pay a whole lot. So she came back to the States and got a job as a museum curator, which is a, very, to come out of her program was an amazing job. But in that field, I think she was getting paid about $40,000 a year, which isn't a whole lot of money in the US. And so we moved back to the US, $40,000 a year, and we are going to live on this salary, and we're going to spend as little money as we can. We got the cheapest apartment we could buy, the cheapest car we could buy. We had a mattress on the floor. We didn't buy any furniture at all. We literally we opened up a bank account when we moved back to the US for the business. And the gift, when you open the bank account, like they give you like a little gift, was one of those, and I don't know if they have them in Australia, but it's like the little lawn chairs that you sit on the side of a soccer field, like a football
totally.
match. The ones that open up. So we get one of those, and my wife's a pretty good negotiator. So she says, like, can we get a second one, please? That became our living room furniture. We had that, those two little chairs. So we kept things super lean, super cheap. And I said, all right, we're gonna start over. We moved back to the States. We had nothing. We just had the suitcases that we traveled with and the clothes on our back. And we moved back, and I said, all right, what are the lessons that I've learned? And one of the lessons I'd learned was the importance of going into an evergreen market. So a market that wasn't going to just collapse overnight. And I started doing research into the longest, most the hobbies in America with the greatest longevity, things that people have been interested in for decades, if not hundreds of years. And the two oldest hobbies in America, number one, are reading, and Amazon.com kind of has taken that one.
Yeah, they got that.
And the second one is gardening. And so I thought, okay, that's interesting. And I said, okay, well, what's a niche with it? What are the niches within the gardening space? And I started doing like a big long list of all the niches and markets within the gardening space. And eventually we settled in on one, the idea of which that came to me from our time in Asia, where we failed miserably, which is with orchids, as in the flower. When we were in Asia, when we were in Hong Kong and Shanghai, we tried growing orchids. They all died and kind of made it on the list of like possible things. And so we started doing research in this market. I began by, I didn't know anything about this market. I began asking questions and and running ads to surveys to figure out what people needed help with.
Yeah.
And I was comparing this market against a couple others that I was looking at. And the orchid market, just head and shoulders above everything else, kept coming up as people were responding to my surveys. They kept saying, I need help with this. And just all indications where this is a winner. And the long story short on this one is,
because I just really, because we're just starting the challenge again at the moment, and such a huge lesson for everybody. Just listen to what Ryan, again, listen to his language, and he sort of did it quite quickly, but he didn't book study the orchid market. He didn't just look at websites. You actually talked to people. You actually sent out surveys. You actually ran test ads to see if people would respond. So you were actively inside that market. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I knew nothing about this, right? I knew nothing about the market other than the fact that it was on a big, long list of stuff that, we listed as possibilities. And it came up because we bought a whole bunch of orchids when we lived in China. And then like a week or so later, they all died. And so I think it started from a place of curiosity, and very, very quickly went into a place of, hey, other people are struggling with the same challenges. Maybe there's an opportunity to serve this group of people. And the way to find that out is not to spend, days in the library or checking, buying books on Amazon.com and reading everything that there needs to be known about orchids. Because there are a lot of people out there, to your point earlier about your client and friend who is who knows cats, but not cat people. There are a lot of people out there that know orchids better than I ever will.
Yeah.
But what I learned how to do is to understand orchid people better than anybody else. Yeah. And so we built this business, started from nothing. We grew it from nothing to $25,000 a month in less than 18 months. My wife quit her job. She started working with me full time. We took that business to over $500,000 a year. We wrote a book. The book has sold over 100,000 copies in the last 10 years.
What's the specific title? What's the actual title, Ryan?
The title of the book is Orchids Made Easy.
Orchids
Made Easy. Orchids Made Easy. So we have a book, we have a DVD. Yeah. We created a dozen classes. So we have every major variety of orchids. So for all the orchid fans in the listening to this right now, Oncidiums, Dendrobiums, Phalaenopsis, Paphiopedilums, Vandas. We moved to African Violet.
Vandas. I'm a big fan. Big Vanda.
Oh, really?
Fan. No, I'm absolutely making it up. Although I do now that, like, I do know, and orchid people are crazy people. I had a girlfriend many years ago, and her father-in-law, which I didn't get along with, he was always a terrifying person. And in fact, now I think about it, maybe this is he was like one of those Bond villains that was always tending to his orchids out the back whenever I'd come visiting, and he would have very little to say, but he'd be like pottering around his orchids. So maybe that's why I've got a thing.
Well, what's fascinating, it's so, I mean, I don't want to get on the tangent. What's so fascinating, so I came into this knowing nothing, like absolutely nothing. And so when you go deep in a market, you start to understand not just why people care about this subject on the surface, but the deep emotional attachment that people have. And I'll share a story that really brought this home for me. And it's happened countless times since this first story. Yeah. And I remember it was an older gentleman who reached out, and he was in his 80s, and he reached out. He was one of our email newsletter subscribers. And we have hundreds of thousands of people on our email newsletter. And he was one of our subscribers. He reached out and he said, Ryan, I need help. And here's the reason why. I said, I'm not the orchid person. My wife was the orchid person. Yeah. And she just passed away last month. We were married for 65 years. And now here I am. I'm left with her collection of 50, 60 orchids. And I don't even know where to begin. But here's the thing. These are the last memories that I have of my wife. And I cannot let these die. I have to keep them alive. It's too important. You have to help me out. And so you can just imagine, this man in his 80s, right? sitting in his little chair,
Yeah.
looking out at the garden or the greenhouse and seeing these flowers, and just, you can imagine him closing his eyes and
Yeah.
just picturing his wife walking, back and forth, tending to the roots, tending to the leaves, and that she's not there anymore when he opens his eyes. And it just breaks your heart hearing a story like that. But what it enables you to do when you go deep in your understanding of a market is understand that you are not just helping someone care for a flower. You're helping someone preserve the most cherished memories of their life. And it goes far beyond what you're doing on the surface. Now, this level of understanding doesn't happen from reading, the ultimate encyclopedia to orchids, which you can get on Amazon.com right now. And
Yeah.
people will know that better than I ever will.
Yeah.
But when you ask the right questions of your audience and you go deep to understand the emotional pain, the challenges, the frustrations that they're having, you can then speak to your market in a way where they deeply resonate with you. And the thing that I've always taken is, and you know this, Ed, but I'll just say it in as few words as possible. It's, if you can describe the pain going on in someone's mind better than they can even describe it to themselves, the only question they have for you is, what do I do about it? What do I do about it? And so this was the market that taught me that lesson, that whether you're in the markets that I went into since then, I've gone into 23 different markets. Started in Scrabble tile jewelry, went into orchid care. Memory improvement was the next market where I had to basically make my parents stop wondering, what the hell am I going to do with my life? Use my degree in neuroscience to do something. And then, teaching people how to play tennis, golf, satellite TV, business funding, weight loss, high-end water filtration systems, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And the one common denominator is asking the right questions to understand the audience in a deep way so that you can not only echo back the natural language that they're using in the market, but also understand the different buckets that exist in each market. So instead of selling to people in a one-size-fits-all way, you begin by asking questions when they land on your website so you can tailor the emails that you send them, tailor the sales letter that you put in front of them, tailor the messaging, the videos, so that you're giving them exactly what it is that they need.
Yeah. So let me break that down a little bit. And this is the core of the Ask Method. Now, of course, you've written a book on the topic of the Ask Method. What's the actual title of the book? Because it's
a really hard one, and so be prepared to write it down.
Okay,
something to take notes.
Yeah.
It's Ask. That's it.
There's a period at the end of the
There is a period. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. There is a period. So if you go to Amazon and you can't find it right away, add the period and you should be able to.
Yeah. So that's the book. But now you mentioned, so core to this method, you've mentioned buckets quite a bit. Yeah. You use the word buckets. So let's just let's give the 2-minute version of the Ask It, because here's the thing: how can I describe pain better than they can? And everybody listening to this right now, think about a time, and it's not only pain, actually, it's also joy, or it's a wow moment, or a piece of empathy, and people say, how can I describe somebody's pain better than they're experiencing it? Easy is the answer to that. That's what that is. Well, it's not, I shouldn't trivialize it, but people do it every day. They do it anytime you're reading an article and you feel your chest go, oh, right? They get it. They understand me, right? If you can have that feeling, if you can get that emotional response, you've done 90% of the work of any copywriter, video sales script, or anything like that. And that's core to it. Describe the pain better than they can. Describe their love of cats better than they can articulate it themselves. Because as a general rule, and anybody listening to me over the years has realized that we're not that articulate, right? So it is actually a lot, and often we don't give thought to how, and this comes back to the language, this is where language is so powerful, because a big part of understanding a topic, if you can describe it, then you understand it by definition, right? You get to understand it better. But most people can't describe their emotions. They can't they find it very hard to come up with the right words and the right language. And that's why, fiction writers and non-fiction writers around the planet that's why reading, let's go back here, that's why reading is the number one hobby. Why? Because as you're constantly reading, you're constantly having emotional moments where people are experiencing things that you have experienced. And they are articulating that better than you can. That's entertainment, actually. That's movies. That is everything. So it's such a powerful point. But I've got this. So I'm into sausage making, Ryan. So I've got my sausage making enterprise. I'm very into the sausage. And I just don't get, and I don't understand my market. So how could I use Ask to understand my sausage making market? So I get to understand, I understand the sausage better than they can.
Absolutely. So I'm a big believer. There are a lot of business models that one can pursue.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was reluctant to do when I was first starting my business is I was very risk adverse. I didn't want to blow my savings. Like I didn't want to the stories of entrepreneurs risked everything that they had. They were down to the last penny and then it just all worked out. I was too afraid.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to take on a whole bunch of debt. I didn't want to, rack up credit card debts. I was very much afraid. And so what I wanted was a business model that enabled me to start with very little money and enabled me to make money very quickly. And the thing that I was really drawn to was selling information and expertise, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was very much drawn to teaching people how to make Scrabble tile jewelry, as opposed to building a manufacturing facility and make this Scrabble tile jewelry. So I say that to preface my answer to your question regarding the sausage making market. And so what I would say is, if you're starting in this space, I would implore you, I'd encourage you to begin with the idea of maybe teaching how to make sausages, as opposed to borrowing $500,000 from a bank, putting a second mortgage on your house, blowing through your 401k to build your own sausage making facility, which is very capital intensive, and you can lose a lot of money doing that. Whereas opposed to creating a course or a book or a membership or a digital program on how to make sausages is just going to cost you, very little money, relatively speaking, and allow you to make money.
But Ryan, I'm not an expert. I'm just interested. Ryan. I'm just interested in sausages. I'm not an expert. I can't teach anybody, Ryan. Well, how do you do that?
That's great. There are, here's the thing, and I'll talk about this in the orchid market. There are the ratio of people who have expertise in a topic and have no idea how to monetize that expertise. The ratio of those people to people who know how to sell online is like probably 1,000, if not 10,000 to 1. So in the orchid market, I knew nothing about that market. So who has written every single, I didn't write the book. My name is on the book, but I work with a ghostwriter to write the book, who is an expert in orchids. The gentleman who does all of our videos on our DVD and video courses, he's a retired school teacher who has hundreds of orchids in his greenhouse. Again, someone who is very happy for me to pay him a few $100s per project to talk about something he absolutely loves. It was a huge win-win. Yeah. The woman who writes all of our blog articles, she lives in New York City. She has an apartment filled with orchids. How did I find her? She had a blog that she was just talking about her orchids. And we asked if she might be willing to write some articles for us. And we pay $10 to $20 an article that she writes. So if you don't have expertise in a topic, there's nothing stopping you from building a 6, maybe even 7-figure business in that topic, simply by finding someone who has love, passion, and expertise in something that maybe you don't. So what I would encourage you to do is, you might find someone that has a blog on sausage making. You might go to a website like Fiverr or Upwork, and there are people that have sausage making skills, and reach out to them and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this project. Would you be open to maybe paying you a little bit of money to teach me what you know? And there are thousands of people out there who would be ecstatic about that opportunity.
Very good.
First things first. First things first. We need to understand this market, right?
Yes.
So we need to begin by asking the right questions. And a big mistake that I see people make all the time, especially when they get wind of this thing called the ask method, is say, "Oh, this is easy.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask people what they want. I'm just saying,
totally.
what do you want?" And I did the same thing in the orchid market, right? First thing I did in that market, I put out a survey and I said, when it comes to your orchids, what's your biggest question? And the thing that came up over and over and over again, Ed, was watering. How to water. When do I water? How much water do I give them? Over and over and over again. How to water, when to water, how to water, when to water, when do I water? Over and over and over again. And so I said, this is easy.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask people what they want, and I'm going to create a guide, the ultimate guide on how to water your orchid, right? Simple, right? This is ask people what they want and give it to them. Yep. And I put it out there, and I reached back out to the same people who answered my survey and promptly sold 0 copies, nothing. And I was like, what did I do wrong? This is like, this should have been easy.
You wanted
and
it.
So
Here it is.
I went back. Yeah, I went back to the research. I went back to the responses. And what I found was that there was another type of response that came up much less frequently. And the response sounded like this. It said, it would say, "Hey, Ryan, I've been growing orchids for years. And the biggest problem I have is every time I try to repot my orchid when it's outgrown its pot, the damn thing dies. And I'm doing everything that I've been told to do. I sterilize my tools before clipping back the roots. I make sure I wash my hands and disinfect them. I know not to use glazed porcelain pots because I know the glaze is toxic to the sensitive orchid roots. And yet, every single time I try to repot, I kill the damn thing. Ryan, what am I doing wrong?" Now compare that response to watering. How to water. When do I water? How much water? And so it led me to a realization, and this is a soundbite for anyone listening to this to write down, that goes like this. Depth of response is more important than frequency of response. And it's something I call the myth of the FAQ. So a big mistake people make when they're going into a market, whether it's sausage making or orchid care, is they say, I'm just going to reach out to the market, figure out what the most frequently asked questions are, and I'm going to create a product that solves those things. Instead, what you're looking for is what are the few problems people will pay money to solve. And how to water their orchid is not one of those things. And so when we talk about buckets in the orchid market, I discovered that there are 4 buckets, 4 specific problems that people would pay money to solve. So the first one was how to repot. The second one was how to get the orchid to reflower after the flowers have fallen off. The third one was how to save a sick or dying orchid, specifically that had yellow leaves. When the leaves turn yellow, that's when people would freak out. And the third was specifically people who received an orchid as a gift, most often for Mother's Day or Valentine's Day, and they didn't even know where to begin. Those were the 4 buckets of people in the orchid market that would pay money for information to solve their problem. And so what I did is, instead of trying to sell in a one-size-fits-all, when someone landed on my website for the first time, I would ask them, which of the following best describes your situation? I'm looking to repot my orchid. I'm trying to get the flowers to rebloom. I have a sick or dying orchid that I need to save, or I need the basics of orchid care from A to Z because I just got one as a gift. And so it helped me realize that the key is not only understanding your market by asking the right questions. The key is, number one, to pay attention to the right data, which is the whole depth of response versus frequency of response. And number 2, to put your audience into buckets. Begin with buckets before you sell. So going to our sausage making example here.
So how do I figure out what sausage buckets there are?
So how do we figure this out? Well, it all begins by asking the right question. So the first question you want to ask is something that I call the SMIQ, which is an acronym that stands for the single most important question. And the single most important question is likely to be something like this. When it comes to making sausages, what is your biggest challenge, frustration, or obstacle that you need help with? Please be as detailed and specific as possible. What that encourages people to do is not only answer the question, but it encourages to give open-ended responses so you can filter out and identify who are the hyper-responsives. Yep. What's the 80-20? What's the top 20% of the market that gives the longest, most detailed responses? Yep. And then once you've identified those hyper-responsives, you go through them one by one and identify the themes that are coming up. And the themes that come up most frequently are candidates for what might be your buckets.
Nice. That's fantastic. And that is, so it sounds so simple, and obviously we do not have the time. I mean, this method is deep, much like learning a language, in the sense that you have a service now that people can, how do you set all this up in the software and all those? We're not going to go into those sort of details. Where can people find all of the details on the Ask method? And getting the book is one thing. Where do they get all of your details?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we do once a year, because this is deep. There are a few steps to this, and we've covered it at a surface level. But I know for especially people who
honestly, just to really ram this home, depth of response way more important than frequency. That is pure, unadulterated marketing gold right there. That's a lesson I just learned, right? So that is huge. Right, just to emphasize how important that just was. You want to understand cat people, you want to understand other people. It's so right, and it makes so many sense on so many levels. But sorry, I interrupted. Go for it.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there's so much. We talk about the nuance of language. There's so much nuance to this process. Right? It's intuitive to ask questions to better understand your audience, but the devil's in the details. You need to know what questions to ask, how to word those questions in such a way that you're not creating a bias. How many buckets should you have? How do you decide between buckets that maybe overlap with one another, and where do you draw the line? So there's a lot of nuance around this. When you start going one level deeper, that becomes apparent as you go through the process. And so for that reason, once a year, Ed, we do something super special. It's called the Ask Method Workshop. And what we do is for free. This is 100% for free. We actually go through the entire Ask Method step by step. We go through the process, and we go through things like how to use a simple Google trick to identify the top 4 buckets in your market. How to figure out where to use the Ask Method in your business based on where you're at right now. If you're the type of person that likes to see examples, like it's great listening to this and maybe seeing some of the notes that Ed, you've put up on the screen here.
People are being basically subconsciously dazzled by those notes.
I know this artwork. I mean, we're going to get this in a museum. My wife.
I'll send you a copy. I know you want to frame it. So.
The art curator, I can't let her lay eyes on this, because she's going to want to put it forth in the museum.
I get asked all the time, can you exhibit here? Can you exhibit there?
I know it must be extremely tiring. Yeah. And the fuchsia, if that's the color, the pink there.
I did that. That's an orchid color, I thought.
It is an orchid color. It's great. Yeah. And so there's so much to this. And there's another thing that I'll walk you through. If you're like a visual person, we'll go through examples. So like actual examples of what this looks like, so you can kind of piece it all together. I have a 14-page blueprint, like a flow chart that walks through all the pieces that you get access to. So anyways, we do this once a year. It just so happens that we're kicking off this workshop like right now. It's only open for a few short days. And so if you'd like to go deeper in what we've talked about, that is a great next step.
Yep.
Ed, I don't know if you have a special URL.
Yeah, I will. What I'll do is when I do the show notes and put all this together and publish all of this, I'll put all the details in that, because it's as like, I think, what day does it start? The workshop start? Like,
the workshop kicks off on July 11th.
July 11th. Yeah. So this is awesome, and for people who have done the challenge and all this sort of stuff, you'll learn the Ask method, right? You will get taught the entire Ask methodology. And I know from students that I've had that have done Ryan stuff already, they just, that workshop is fantastic, is incredibly valuable. People will be noticing me implementing it on my page over the next couple of weeks, as well as we ramp up the challenge. Like, it just kicks me that I didn't do this like 14 years ago. So I'm really looking forward to that. And so it's fair to say then, into the answer, the final question here is that this is a way, like if you were literally starting again, you'd be eating your own dog food here, wouldn't you? You'd be doing the Ask Workshop as a great roadmap of starting from pure scratch.
It's exactly what I would do. I'd go back. I have a big, long list of all the niches that I think are worth exploring. I'd go back to that list. I'd pick the first one on the list, and I would ask my SMIQ to figure out if there's enough demand and interest in that market. And if the answer is yes, that's the exact market that I would dive right into.
Yeah.
Ask is perfect if you're starting from scratch.
And you would go into, because I know an immediate question that pops into my head when I think about this is, yeah, okay, but I don't have a list. I don't have anybody to ask right now. Like, this is literally, like, I've decided, you know what? I'm finally going to make this. I finally want to create a business that's going to be about me. That's going to, boy, that $10,000 a month sounds pretty damn awesome. Do you have to have a list to start this, or do you?
Well, it's a great question. And one of the coolest aspects about this workshop is not only are you going to learn the ask method, but we actually customize the workshop based on where you're at in your business right now. So for example, if you're just getting started and you have no idea what market to go into, the workshop is customized to you. If you've started a business, you know what business you want to go into, but you don't really have much of an email list, you're going to see how to use the ask method to grow that list. And you're going to hear from other entrepreneurs who are at that same stage when they started and what they did to grow their list. Yep. So no matter what stage you're at in your business right now, whether you're just getting started or you have $1 million business that you want to take to that next level, you're going to see how the ask method can work for you.
Yeah, brilliant. Very good. Ryan, thank you so much for today. It's been a fantastic, I've gotten so much out of this discussion. So, frankly, don't care about anybody else. I'm done. I've got my personal consultation just really knocked out of the park. Thank you very much. But in all seriousness, that was really brilliant. And it always fascinates me how people's backgrounds, it does. It influences the way you go about tackling a market. And if obviously my gold comment is the depth of response is way more important than frequency. That's a tactical piece of information you can take to the bank right now. But I think the more important lesson, particularly for my audience, people who are doing the challenge and people who are going through all this process, is this constant reinforcement of you can't, I'm on this real rant at the moment, Ryan, which is I just see too many people studying how to do a business, right? And by that, and it's not their fault. They've spent, a decade, decade and a half, maybe 2 decades learning that when you went to, like you did your 4 years of Chinese, right? Mandarin, God, I'm just really stuffing that up. You did your 4 years of that, and you didn't learn anything, but you went and did 8 weeks of immersion, and boom, you come back and you make your lecturers draw a job, right? To me, that's the other lesson of what we talked about, is that actually you have to get into the market. And the thing I like about Ask as an approach, and I talk about roadmaps and roadmaps that are really, really effective. And you have to have the right roadmap for the level that you're at. Right, it's so important. What I love about Ask and the approach that you've developed here, Ryan, is that it forces you to get into that market. Right, you have to. So you test the market. You're actually in the market, and you're talking to it, and you're getting that level of feedback. For those for students of mine who are listening to this and have utilized Dean Jackson's Winter Haven method, you could equally take that depth of response as a key element in, and you see this, people respond to emails. If they respond to the email with one word, they probably think you're a bot, right? They probably think you're some sort of automated thing that's nobody cares what the result is, because we've been trained that way. So I love the fact that, if there's a lesson to be taken away here is, be like Ryan in terms of immersion. But he wasn't stupid either. Like he didn't immersion and starve himself. Like this is this burn the ships approach. I've put 450,000 students through the challenge, and I could count on one hand with 3 fingers chopped off people who burnt the ships, cut off all forms of income and just jumped into something and actually made it work. Most people crash and burn and starve. So it's very, very important to be able to do something that, you can do. This, the thing I like about this methodology is, again, you can be working, you can be doing your 9 to 5, and you can be running these tests, running these SMIQs, and building. Okay, this market's, we've got a pulse here. We've got some responses. We've got some decent responses. That's worthy of us, because there are a lot of fact finder entrepreneurs that are, very hesitant to go into any market, right? Because, I don't want to spend all that work. How do I know it's going to be right? You never know it's going to be right. But by utilizing, really road-tested, pardon the pun, roadmaps like the ASK methodology, you can do that. And this once-a-year opportunity to just go through and learn the whole ASK methodology for free is something that I encourage everybody to take up. It just makes so much sense. Ryan, thank you very much. Sorry for the little lecture at the end, but I just wanted to tie it together for everybody. And mate, we'll see you around the traps.
Ed, it's been an honor. Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to connecting again soon.
No worries. I've got to come over to one of these Ask workshop things that you do.
I love it. Open invitation.
Mate, that's awesome. I will hold you to that. Who's this funny Australian on our doorstep with bags? What's going on here? He said it was an open invitation. No, that's great. Mate, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And all the details will be in the show notes and the links and all this sort of thing, everything that we've talked about. I'll have all of that available for you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody.